Thank you. Good morning to you all, and a warm welcome to this event where we are presenting the joint SRM and Politecnico Turing report, Energy Med and Italian Energy Report 2022, Alternative Fuels, a strategic option for the Euro-Mediterranean region. First of all, on behalf of Intesa Sanpaolo, I would like to thank the Honorable Member Patrizia Toia, Tiziana Beghin for supporting also this year for the fourth time the presentation of our research and for the introductory speeches, and Honorable Member Marco Zanni for his very much appreciated support this year. Energy has always been a matter of major relevance for the EU. Until recently, it was addressed mainly from a climate perspective. It is as a way to decarbonize the economy in order to enable the EU to reach the commitments taken at the COP21. However, since the outbreak of the conflict between Russia and Ukraine, energy has been increasingly associated with security of supply. Therefore, exploring the potential contribution of alternative fuels to replace fossil fuels with the aim of addressing both the climate and the security of supply challenges becomes all the more important. This is the aim of the report that we are presenting to you today. But also let me explain why energy matters so much for a banking group like Intesa Sanpaolo. Energy is very much interclosed with the financial services industry from multiple angles. The financing one, we are financing major EU energy companies and related infrastructures. The trading one, Intesa Sanpaolo is active on the commodities and derivative market, and post-trading one, where we are also funding the collateral, the exchange of collateral. And of course, monitoring the development around EU policies and reforms of the EU energy market and regulatory framework to address the energy crisis matters to us, since our bank needs to have all the relevant information to take appropriate and informed decisions when defining a lending strategy to this sector. As a large banking group, we are participating in the public debate. We are an active participant within EU fora, where we advise EU industrial partners in embracing transition towards new energy sources and how to structure bankable projects. I'm referring here to the two alliances, the European Clean Hydrogen Alliance and to the Renewable and Low Carbon Fuel, of which we are active member, and chair also of the working group in charge of the project's bankability, which is one of the great challenges of the success of alternative fuels. Sharing the research conducted within our group and in collaboration with distinguished academic centers is also part of our mission. Now, without further delay, I would like to give the floor to our speaker that will present the report, Mr. Massimo De Andres, Director General of SRM, for his presentation. He will be followed by Professor Bompard, Director of ESL at the Politecnico of Torino. After the presentation, we also have a discussion with Mr. Mazera, who will take the floor as a former director of the GRC and now a senior scientist at the Politecnico of Torino. And then we have Mr. Luca Matrone from the head of energy or at the corporate investment banking division at Intesa Sanpaolo. The presentation will be then closed by Professor Profumo, who will join us remotely. So thank you. I give the floor to Massimo De Andres.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Francesca. And it's my turn to thank very much. Honorable member of the European Parliament, Patrizia Toia, Marco Zanni, and Tiziana Beghin for their patronage, but also for their very good and inside intervention, and also to thanks my colleague of Sanpaolo Banking Group here in Brussels for having organized this presentation and for their support. As you have already said and mentioned, this is the fourth here we provide this annual report, and I have a presentation. I ask you to follow this presentation together with me. And I would like to say first, as a first point, that this is the 2022 report, but it's not simply an annual report. It's the output of a cooperation with the Politecnico of Torino, devoted to building a strong analysis on energy transition in the Euro-Mediterranean region. And let me thank Professor Bompard for the partnership with the Politecnico School, for the partnership with the Energy and Security Lab of the Politecnico School of Torino, that is fundamental. And I have to share with him and with his team all the greetings we received for today and for the previous presentation, because this report has not been possible to realize this report and the previous one without the strong job we did together. As you can see in the following slide, which take the story of this report. In 2019, we started focusing on the role of natural gas as a buffer to help the energy transition. In 2020, the report was mainly about renewables and the fundamental role that North African countries can play in the development of renewable energy production. Last year, the analysis was on hydrogen, which can become the key to reaching decarbonization goals. And this year, the report offers an in-depth analysis on alternative fuels, both biofuels and synthetic. But let me underline an important aspect, which I think we discussed a lot on that point with Professor Bompard. We are not simply developing a research project. This is not simply a report, an annual report. We are building a think tank, bringing together economic, which is our side, being part of a banking group, being an economic research center, and technological analysis, technological knowledges coming from the Politecnico of Torino. And to bring together these two sides, we provide analysis during all the year to support this new energy interplay. We use this term. I think it's a term we should use more, an interplay between Europe and South Mediterranean countries in order to build a new partnership, a win-win partnership for energy transition. I would like to start by checking together with you how the EU energy mix changed over the last 20 years for gross inland consumption, which represent the quantity of energy necessary to satisfy inside the European Union inland consumption. We can clearly see, checking these two pies, how Europe was moving to increase renewables and how important the use of natural gas is. Natural gas, as you can see, which was expected to play the role of a buffer to help the energy transition, because everyone knows that is the fossil fuel with the lowest emission, has grown from 20 to 24% in these 20 years, becoming more and more important for supporting our energy needs. And this is also the reason why Europe was, before war, so dependent on Russian gas imports. In the same period of time, oil, as you can see, decreased, which is the dark blue, decreased from 38% to 32%, still remaining a key source for the European energy. But the most significant rise has happened in renewables. Which is the yellow part of the pie, and biofuels, which have increased from 6.4%. I prefer to check my slide here because I don't see the numbers over there. But I have the same 6.4% 4% to 18% of the total in 2020. And if we take a closer look at the electricity generation mix, this is the energy mix. If we take the electricity generation mix, the figures are even better. Renewables peak in 2020 to 41% of the electricity production. But at the beginning of this year, of this year, okay, unfortunately, we had a total breakdown, as we know, of previous scenarios and forecasts in 2021. So before war, at the end of last year, 90% of the EU gas consumption was imported in general, and 45% of this import was from Russia. And let me underline that this figure is 14 points higher than the EU gas import level from Russia in 2010. So in 10 years, from 2010 to 2020, we had 14 points of increase in percentage in import from Russia for Russia gas. In addition, last year, Russia also accounted for 27% of oil and 46% of coal EU imports. But as consequence of the invasion of Ukraine and European and international sanctions, from mid-March to end of September, Russian gas to the European Union fell by 80%. We will see more detailed figures from Professor Bompard later on. And the lower supply from Russia were compensated by three main facts, we can say. The first, reducing gas demand thanks to the energy saving by final user, because, of course, higher prices and less demand. Diversification gas suppliers, especially from North Africa and Algeria, play an important role, and boosting renewables, but also with higher import of LNG from United States and Qatar. And nevertheless, the key point, we had a lot of new import of gas from Algeria. Nevertheless, the key point is to look at the South Mediterranean countries, not only for current and urgent fossil supply needs, that of course we have and we need to recover in some way, but also, and I would like to say especially, to build a new partnership based on renewables, hydrogen and bio and synthetic fuels. Now, new technologies carry new opportunities. For instance, think about the possibility to produce electricity from a solar plant in North Africa and to make green hydrogen. The pace of renewable capacity growth in North Africa and Middle East is expected, as you can read, to double over the next 5 years, not in the next 10 years, in the next 5 years, from 15 gigawatt to 32 gigawatt. Let us take two countries as examples. You can see in the map, Morocco and Egypt. Morocco renewable capacity is forecast to double in the next 5 years, and Egypt is expected to increase by 68%. Let me also underline that Morocco published its own roadmap to green hydrogen last year, and Egypt did the same during the COP in Sharm el-Sheikh 1 month ago, also signing a bilateral memorandum of understanding with the European Union to create a strategic partnership on green hydrogen. Our report stresses with data and figures the key point that Europe should increasingly boost the extent of its green energy cooperation, also through coherent, exactly as Mr. Zanni said, through coherent national policies, especially from European Mediterranean countries like this. Let's also consider that oil and gas trade is essentially an exchange of money. I pay oil and gas through money. While cooperation on hydrogen, renewables, and biofuels is also an industrial, technological, and corporate cooperation that also provide bilateral benefits and results in a win-win outcome. Let's come now to the key focus of the report on alternative fuels. This definition includes both fuels having biological origin and synthetic fuels produced via chemical processes from renewable sources. These include, for example, hydrogen produced by electrolysis using photovoltaic or wind power, and fuels coming from CO2 reforming using renewable hydrogen. The first point we stressed in the report is that alternative fuels should not be considered as competitors to electricity, but on the contrary, complementary to electricity in a cooperative approach. The production of biofuels could allow efficient use of agricultural residues like feedstocks without compromising the portion of soil devoted to food production and recovery for abandoned and degraded lands. On the other hand, the production of synthetic fuels could help the reconversion of industrial know-how and infrastructures related to oil and gas, existing infrastructure, that we should also think about the reconversion. I mean, like refineries that are very important in several Mediterranean countries, thus avoiding a lot of expertise and also a lot of jobs, because there are a lot of jobs currently on this sector, oil and gas, chemical oil and gas sector. So both bio and synthetic fuels could play a major role in energy mix, and future scenarios foreseen an increase, especially in the transport sector, where these are expected to account for 27% by 2050. Our report stressed the point that we see clear benefits in increasing the production of alternative fuels in the Euro-Mediterranean region. Their production could increase the security of energy system in northern and eastern European countries by exploiting locally available resources and potentially lowering the impact of energy price volatility related to international geopolitical instability. Their penetration may also be one of the drivers for the development of a new energy dialogue across the Mediterranean, as I said, not based only on fossil, but also on the interplay, as I said, between green energy, green electricity, hydrogen, and alternative fuels. And finally, their introduction could help decarbonizing hard-to-abate sector, helping to preserve and reconvert the existing oil and gas industry. But we should be aware that there are two big concerns. These two big concerns are the large quantity of electricity, green electricity, that we have to produce, and the widespread water availability, which is probably the major limiting factor. Water can be produced with, in these countries, I mean in the North African countries, for example, with the salinization process, which still require electricity. So, I mean, the key point is the large quantity of electricity we need to produce with solar and wind plants. So it's clear that these concerns imply the need to strongly increase solar and wind production, also in North African countries, in order to produce green electricity for supporting the process, also for alternative fuels production. So there is a strong relation between solar and wind production and the possibility to produce biofuels. Nevertheless, there are also warning signs related to raw materials. If the production of alternative fuels require a large amount of electricity, increasing the renewable share of electricity generation is crucial to meet climate target, but the supply chain for raw materials could represent a major issue for solar and wind plants. If you look together with me the slide, you can see that, for instance, China owns around 80% of manufacturing capacity of polysilicon, which is essential to produce solar plants. And more in general, China, as you can read, has major shares in all the manufacturing stages of the supply chain, while Europe covers only 8%. As for wind turbines, talking about wind and not solar, wind turbines production, China has a manufacturing capacity of 54% for raw materials, 41% for prepared equipment, and 56% for components. So if the quest for greater European control over raw materials availability and solar and wind plant industry production is already evident for the European Union, because these data are very clear, this could also become a great opportunity, we think, for a partnership with North African countries, including the production of solar plant and wind turbines, with agreements based on technological exchanges and manufacturing investment in these countries. Again, we think a partnership with these countries, especially with some of them, is crucial also to increase the security of supply of raw materials and for the manufacturing of components needed in green energy production. In this context, it is important that the European Union designs policies aimed at promoting the development of alternative fuels, and a comprehensive and coherent policy framework already exists within the European Union, as the three honorable members of the European Parliament already mentioned. The REPower EU plans intend to reach a production of 35 billion of cubic meters of polymethane in Europe by 2030, tenfold increase of current figure of 3, which is the current production, 3 billion of cubic meters. That means an estimated investment amount of 37 billion euros, which is a quite important amount of investment. And as for Italy, this growth should reach 6 billion of cubic meters. The Fit for 55 revision set objectives of 2.2% as the penetration level for advanced biofuel in transport energy consumption, and 2.6% as the target for hydrogen and synthetic hydrogen fuels in the transport sector. At the same time, we are not only Europe is thinking and preparing a new set of regulation. At the same time, also North African countries are evolving and promoting new policies and regulations for alternative fuels. Morocco's strategy, thanks to its 2020 Power to X roadmap. Yes, Morocco has a Power to X roadmap. We should think about that. Not only Europe. It boosts renewables in the energy mix up to 52% by 2030. And an additional example again is Egypt, that plans to use the use of waste as alternative fuels and to green the civil aviation sector through the introduction of 2% of biofuels to airplanes by 2030. The Egyptian government is also signing different agreements with both national and international companies for production of green hydrogen. Moving on to the demand side, the role of alternative fuels is quite promising in two sectors, which is in a certain way one sector, so the transport sector, two because it's aviation and shipping. And especially we think for shipping. Why especially for shipping? Because shipping accounts for a significant share of 2.3% of the world emissions of CO2, and is one of the transport sector where targets already existing are more ambitious. The IMOU, the International Maritime Organization target is to reduce the total annual emission by at least 50% compared with 2008, while limiting carbon intensity by at least 40% in 2030. And the point here, I think, more perhaps than on the aviation, is that ship owners, from their side, seems ready to invest in new green vessels. If we look at the most updated figures, 46.1% of vessels currently under construction, which means the new order books, the new vessels under construction, 46 of the new vessels under construction will be able to use biofuels or alternative propellant. 2023, so next year, 5% of the global capacity is expected to be alternatively powered. 5% is not too much, but I mean, it was 1% some years ago. And now we have the new order book, which is quite promising. As you can see by the names, MSC, Maersk, Costco, and so on, the main global carriers are investing in alternative fuels, especially some of them, especially in methanol. I'm ready to conclude with my last two slides. Our report also stressed an important point. That is, if we look at the context, I've already mentioned, so the growing role of renewables in the North Africa, the potential role of hydrogen and biofuels. What I want to stress now is that ports are taking on a fundamental role to boost green energy transition. We must remember, just to have clear ideas, that ports are normally the arrival points of pipelines, are close to energy-intensive industries where hydrogen can be easily used. They usually host refineries and activities related to energy sector, oil and gas, old, we can say, or a traditional energy sector that have to be converted. And biofuels can also contribute to this important industry transformation. Many ports have chosen to start investing in green energy production as, for example, offshore wind plants in northern European ports or solar plants in South Mediterranean ports. So their role is also fundamental to support green evolution and decarbonization for the shipping industry, for instance, with the cold ironing, that means to provide green energy to ships where are in the port. What we have seen in the previous slide is particularly true for Italy. Italy is a natural energy hub in the middle of the Mediterranean, a sort of bridge, we can say, between Europe and North Africa, and also between East and West. In addition, pipelines links Italy and Europe with producer countries. In this context, Italy has many key strategic energy ports. The top 5 and Italian energy ports concentrate around 70% of energy traffic, and these are Trieste, Cagliari, Augusta, Milazzo, and Genoa. So 3 are from the south of Italy. The greatest refining capacity is concentrated in the southern Italian ports. 80% of gas import this year, from January to October, is via pipeline. 64% of gas imported via pipeline arrives in the southern Italian ports. And the final important consideration, Italy could become the European gateway for import of renewables energy from these countries, I mean from North African countries, gateway, European gateway, I mean not national gateway. And in this way, hydrogen production chain could start. So my final remarks, and it's over. The evolution of the energy system in the Mediterranean region looks at energy security and sustainability unfolding on a double track. The long-term one is imposed by the transition toward decarbonization, and the short-term one is driven by the contingency related to energy crisis. The increasing gas imports from North Africa is a way of facing the contingency related to the breakdown in geopolitical relationship with Russia and of reinforcing the new central role of the Mediterranean dialogue. A Mediterranean dialogue for ensuring the security of energy, or energy security if you prefer, that is not based only on fossil fuel. If renewables and hydrogen are a new energy partnership opportunity, alternative fuels could contribute and constitute a further element for strengthening the green trans-Mediterranean cooperation. But we need to build a common regulatory framework for facilitating and supporting the inter-Mediterranean trade of alternative fuels to allow for their effective penetration in the end-use sector. And we think that the first end-use sector that can use biofuels are avionic, but I stress the point in my presentation on the shipping industry. Thank you very much for your attention, and I leave the floor to Professor Boba.
Wait just for the presentation.
Molto interessante.
Un attimo solo.
Okay. So, honorable member of the Parliament, Mrs. Passamonti, dear Massimo, ladies and gentlemen, I'm glad to be here and to try to share with you some of the consideration, ideas and numbers we collected in this study. This is, as Massimo was calling before, the last, let's say, stop of a tour that started 4 years ago, in which we try to analyze the main aspects related to the energy issues in the Mediterranean area. What I will try to tell you today, I have a bunch of numbers, but of course I cannot share with you all of them. So what I will try to do basically is, I have a problem with this. I will try to share to you some basic concept, and then of course I will be glad to share the presentation with those of you that will be interested in going into more details. We'll try to start our discussion considering the general situation of energy in the Mediterranean area. Then I will try to say something about the impacts of the Russian-Ukrainian crisis of the present situation that provided a change in the priorities in the energy arena. And then we will try basically to focus a little bit more on the interplay of the commodity in the Mediterranean area, particularly discussing which can be the role of alternative fuels in this context. So you see, this is roughly speaking the situation of the Mediterranean nowadays. We have three shores. We have the north shore, the south shore, and the eastern shore of the Mediterranean. If you look to our case, so South Europe, basically, we have a very high fossil fuel dependencies, more than 90%, and this is a fuel just for fossil fuels, and the overall dependencies of this area is around 60%. Even a worse situation, similar or worse, depends on the two indicators, is for the eastern shore, in which the fossil fuel dependencies, that means how much of the fossil fuels are taken from outside the region, is something around 80%. And the overall energy dependency is around 70%. The situation is the opposite on the southern shore, where you see that the dependence, both in terms of fossil fuels and energy dependence at large, are negative. So they have more energy than they need for their internal use. And this is the situation why we have a dialogue between the north and the southern shore. That is now a black dialogue based on fossil fuels.
Okay.
You see, the import dependence in the North country are generally greater than 50%, is the case of Italy, is the case of Spain. The only countries in which this dependence is lower is France, because they have nuclear power, and is Montenegro, Bosnia, Herzegovina, and Slovenia, because they have coal and biomasses. So in this case, biomasses can play a remarkable role. Albania, they have hydro and some crude oil. Israel and Syria, because they have natural gas. So in these countries, the dependencies is lower of 50%. So on the other hand, in the southern shore are located the relevant net exporter of fossil fuels. So Algeria for natural gas, Libya for both gas and crude oil. Those are some numbers related to the impacts of Russia supply, and so which are the drawbacks of the Russian-Ukrainian crisis. The dependency from Russia in the northern shore is pretty high. For Italy, 43%, for natural gas, crude oil, 11%, oil products, something less than 10%, and solid fuels that they play a very limited role, so it's not so important, but is 50%. This is what means to be dependent in the northern Mediterranean shore from Russia. And if you look what does it mean in terms of money, that is pretty interesting, because the value of import for Russia in the northern shore in 2020 was something around 6 billion of euros for natural gas. That was the 20% in terms of market value of the imports. And for crude oil was something more or less the same, is 5.5 billion of euros. So before 2022, the crisis between Russia and Ukraine, Russia played a key role in the supply of countries belonging to the North Shore, so the Southern European countries. You remember that in 2006 and 2009, we have already a Ukrainian crisis. In 2009, the supply from Ukraine was stopped for 13 days. And which was the answer of Europe to that? Well, let's improve the corridors, not let's change the suppliers. And so they did Nord Stream 1 and 2, the Germans, to bypass Ukraine. And then they tried to do the South Stream to Bulgaria, that then was diverted to Turkey because Gazprom was not aligned with the European regulation. But so we introduced the criterion N-1 security, that was derived from the electricity industry. But Russia was still the main producer. And what was interesting that from 2010 to 2020, we increased the dependency from Russia of 10%, because we were concerned about the corridors, not of the source. The geopolitical security of the commodity is related to both. You need to have the source country and you have to have the corridor to get into the national entry point. Okay, so this was what Europe did. I think it was also interesting to try to tell you which is the money we are providing to Russia, starting from the beginning of the war. I think it's an interesting number. There is a think tank that is Finnish, CREA, that said from the beginning of the war, February 2024, to the end of November, basically yesterday, the total amount of money transferred to Russia was 122 billion of euros for energy commodity we derived. And you see it's more or less 65 for 52 for gas and 3 point something for coal. The High Representative of the European Union for Foreign Affairs, Josep Borrell, stated that in his opinion, we have something like 1 billion euro per day is the total EU energy expenditure toward Russia. And this is just to, of course, underline the interaction between, say, energy, the economics, and geopolitical issues related to this. Okay, so in this perspective, we had, and Honorable Toia was pointing out that before, we had the shift, a rotation of the triangle of the commodities, of the energy. World Energy Council said that we have 3 main attributes for energy we need to pursue. One is sustainability, one is security, one is equity. So sustainability is environmental impacts, security is to be sure to get the energy we need where we need in the amounts we need, and equity is to be able, is related to affordability, social impacts. People need to be able to pay the bill. Before the crisis between Russia and Ukraine, on the top of the triangle was sustainability. All of us were focused on that. And then you see we have a rotation of this triangle to the right. And so on the top we have security and equity, and sustainability is in the second, let's say, in a second ranking position, if you want. Somebody speaking, we moved from decarbonization to recarbonization thanks to this shift. The impacts in terms of the prices, of course, of the crisis are huge. We are very well aware of that. If you look to TTF, that maybe will be somehow, let's say, mild in the future. We start from prices of the gas of 72 euros for megawatt hour 21st February 2022, just before the war, to 172 on March 7, with a peak of 350 euros for megawatt hour on August 26. In the following months, the decrease, we had a decrease up to 100 euros per megawatt hour in October. It was due to the reduction in the demand and also to the fact that we could fill our storage in Europe, and so we need a little bit less storage. There are some signals now to a further increase. Standard & Poor's, asked by the Commission, did an estimation to keep that the gas price will be kept higher than 100 euros per megawatt hour till the end of the next winter, that we are on now, and then we'll reduce maybe to 70 euros by mid-2003 and to 60 euros in 2025. Those are forecasts for the future, so I mean, we don't know. But it was just to recall a little bit which is the situation that jumped in our energy scenario in the Mediterranean. So you see, we started having a back dialogue between the two shores, basically northern and southern shore, in which fossil fuels still play a crucial role. In 2019, the share of fossil commodity in the total primary energy supplies were 75% altogether, 65 in the North Shore, 86 in Eastern, and 95 in the South. Fossil fuel dependence, we already saw, are very high. And the quasi-totally of the proved reserves of natural gas and oil are located in the southern shore, not in the north. And based on that, we have this black dialogue in which we got fossil fuels from the North Africa and we bring to southern Europe. What we were thinking to do was, okay, let's shift from a black to a green dialogue. Let's produce renewables in North Africa, and let's bring it to Europe through electricity power lines, or eventually we transform into hydrogen and we put blended in terms of maximum 20% of hydrogen in regular gas, Transmed, Green Stream, and so forth. Then we had to stop a little bit this for the situation, the crisis I was already mentioned. So the idea of the green dialogue should be very interesting, but has been a little bit, I wouldn't say stopped, but slowed down by the international crisis. Just to give you an example, this is the situation of the change in the dialogue. This is Italy, and you see the two entry points, Tarvisio, that is the Russian gas from Brotherhood, from Ukraine, and Mazara-Vallo, that is the Italian national entry point from Algeria. You see, if we look to October 2022, last month, we got 2 million of cubic meter in 1 month, and so we satisfied basically 40% of our needs through Algeria. While in the same month, the import from Russia was 0.03 million of cubic meter, so 0.6% of the total import to Italy. So this is the shift and the recarbonization going back to black of the dialogue in the Mediterranean. Well, just an example of. So in a few months, Algeria has replaced Russia as a major gas supplier to Italy. So, nevertheless, given this situation, we need to pursue the inter-commodity dialogue or interplay between different commodities. The idea of energy transition, I like to say, is like to make a cocktail. So you have not just one ingredient. You have, for making a cocktail, a set of ingredients, and you need to be good enough to choose the right shares of each ingredient. So X% of this, Y% of that. And also what we studied this year in terms of biofuels should be understood in this perspective. So biofuels or alternative fuels altogether will play for sure a role. We need to understand which is the right share to give to them in this energy transition. Electricity from renewable is expected to assure to play the central role, so to be an important part of this cocktail in the future, and also to be the basis for the green dialogue that we need to re-establish between the different shores of the Mediterranean. However, electricity cannot completely decarbonize by itself the energy systems, because there are sectors so-called hard to abate. So final uses that are related to high temperature industrial processes and transportation, aviation and maritime transportation, in which electricity doesn't seem to be a good player. So we need the synergic, to build the synergy between electricity and other commodities like green hydrogen, geothermal, solar, thermal, nuclear, and alternative fuels. So here you see a little bit the whole picture for a possible transition. In terms of the alternative fuels we consider in the report, we can start from the classification of ICAO, that is the International Civil Aviation Organization, that is very active in this field. And you see that you can compare the traditional fuels for aviation, so aviation kerosene and aviation gasoline, with what they call AAF, alternative aviation fuels with lower CO emission, that can be classified in biofuels, and then altogether sustainable aviation fuels, and we have biofuels, recycled carbon fuels, synthetic fuels. We also consider natural gas, liquefied, and hydrogen. For that, we have some targets according to RED second directive we already mentioned. And you see, biofuels should contribute, so count toward the overall 14% in the transportation target, advanced biofuel 1.5%, the renewable liquid and gaseous transport fuels non-biological origin should count for 14%, provide this contribution, and also the recycled carbon fuels up to 14%. This is just to say they will make a contribution, they will not solve the problem by themselves alone. Which is the status of the alternative fuels in the northern and southern shore? Well, the biofuels penetration in the Mediterranean area differs greatly among the shores. We have a specific target and mandates that has facilitated the penetration of those fuels in the transport sector and in the North Shore, even if there are relevant differences. So you see, in France, we have a steady high level of biodiesel and growing trend for biogasoline. In Spain, we have growing trend from biodiesel, and in Italy, quite steady state figures for biodiesels and low figures for biogasoline. So the situation is a little bit diversified. If you look for other European countries, you see the most important ones. After France, Spain, Italy, there is something in Portugal, and then the other countries are much, much less relevant in this respect. The share of biofuels in the total energy consumption from transport is still small, 6% in France, 4% in Spain, 3% in Italy. In terms of biogasoline, is even lower, 1.4% in France, 0.4% in Spain, 0.1% in Italy. So even the three European countries more relevant have a small share of this. The solid alternative fuels, well, in the southern shore, basically there are none. The only exception we have, they use, of course, wood and derivatives in terms of biofuels, but that's it. They have no other biofuels, with two remarkable exceptions that are Turkey and Cyprus, in which they have some biofuels consumption in the transport sector, 65 kilotons of oil equivalent for Turkey and 11 for Cyprus in 2019. Besides that, there is nothing. So it's a bit a green field, the southern shore of the Mediterranean, in terms of increasing the penetration of fuels. Some long-term scenarios and some key messages about this, let's say, contribution to the cocktail of the transition from alternative fuels. There are two interesting long-term scenarios we consider. The GRC Global Energy and Climate Outlook, with the current policy and 1.5C scenarios, is the one to limit the CO2 emissions and the increase of the temperature to 1.5 degrees Celsius. The PRIME's long-term scenarios, that is a price-induced market equilibrium system. They have a reference scenarios 2020 and Fit for 55 scenarios. And then the European Commission Clean Planet for All scenarios, in which they do different analysis. So if you want to summarize here in the report, you can see a more detailed analysis, some findings from these scenarios and some commonalities. The first one is the alternative fuels could have a relevant role in the decarbonization of the transport sector, but not immediately. It will take time. All scenarios foresee net zero emission or important GHG reduction. They predict in the scenarios that are, let's say, more demanding in terms of reducing the emission, predict the role of these fuels, but after 2030. Alternative fuels, and in particular e-fuels, are not alternative, but synergic to electrification. So the idea to have a competition among commodities is not, in my understanding, the right one. The idea is to have the cocktail of the commodities for the transition, so put them together in a synergic way. All alternative fuels will contribute to transport sector, whose total energy consumption is expected to decrease thanks to the improving of energy efficiency.
Gianni, il problema è, siccome è in inglese,
Oddio.
Hackeraggio
No,
simulato da intrusione.
Abbiamo un intruder. A deployment of alternative fuel behind the transport sector is also expected. Additional policy intervention are crucial. Reference or current policy scenarios do not foresee relevant alternative fuels deployment and need to be integrated to allow their penetration. Okay, just to give you an overview, this is a representation of the possible scenarios up to 2070. So we were discussing before 2050, now we move to 2070. And you see that the share that you can see from liquid biofuels, e-fuels, and biogases are, generally speaking, not so much present before 2030, 2040. You see, if you look the scenarios that, I don't know, the top, the bottom right scenario, you see you can biomasses and e-fuels will pop up from 2030, and then e-fuels from 2040, and then 2050. Generally speaking, the scenarios you can see summarized here can provide the idea that it's not a short-term issue, but is something that will pop up 2000, as we said. And the scenarios are saying exactly that. More or less, this is the situation we could expect, where alternative fuels can play a crucial role in the transport sector. So we think that the transport sector is the place or the area in which they need to be deployed much more, because those sectors hard to abate, we mentioned before, in which it's difficult to think to competing commodities. Those sectors are basically maritime transportation, Massimo already explained very well this, and in general aviation. So if we look to the transportation sector in the Mediterranean region, all the three shores I was mentioning before, north, south, eastern, 94% of the sector of the sectorial total final consumption is currently matched by oil products. 75% of oil products consumption is due to the road transportation, and basically 30% of the overall CO2 emission are related to the transport sector. So in this context, which is the role of alternative fuels? So alternative fuels cannot represent a competitor to electricity in the energy transition process, we already said, but can support it in decarbonizing hard to abate sector, like the long distance aviation and maritime transport. An analysis of technical potential for biofuels production based on biomasses feedstock availability in the Mediterranean for 2030, and this is one of the analyses we did in this report, focus on three production pathways. So the use of sustainable aviation fuels and renewable diesel from lignocellulosic biomasses, the sustainable aviation fuels from waste oil and fats, like used cooking oil, and the bio liquefied natural gas from anaerobic digestion of organic fraction of municipal solid waste. So, based on the analysis we did, we estimated the total technical potential for the North Shore of 28, almost 30 millions of tons of oil equivalent. That is the 18% of the current fossil demand. So you see the impact is not huge, but is significant. The sustainable aviation fuel potential from oil and fats could cover 15-60% of the sustainable aviation fuels. And bio LNG production could cover something like 20% of the expected biofuels demand for the maritime sector. Southern and eastern shores estimates technical potential proved slightly lower due to the existing uncertainties. And there are also geopolitical situation pretty different from those we have in Europe. And moreover, we did an assessment of the substitutability of oil products with synthetic fuel obtained with the Fischer-Tropsch process. So it's what we call the e-fuels, using green hydrogen that we get from electrolysis and carbon dioxide by carbon capture, maybe by the emission of industrial power plant. So basically we have renewables. From renewables we get electricity. From electrolysis we get hydrogen. We put together with hydrogen carbon dioxide and we can get liquid synthetic fuels. But we got that has been shown the impossibility of a complete substitution due to the relevant amount of electricity from renewables or nuclear sources that would be required for feeding the production process. I will just give you an idea about this and then I have done. Okay, so we tried to understand if you want to do e-fuels and to replace all the fossil fuels in the Mediterranean transportation sector, how much generation of electricity we should need. So we did a computation. The electricity needed would be something like 6,000 terawatt-hour per year. That is 3 times the current electricity generation in the Mediterranean. If we wanted to do that with PV panels, for example, we need 4,500 gigawatt, more or less, of PV installed. We have 70 presently. If we want to do with wind, we did 2,600 to 2,500 gigawatt. We have 82. If you want to do that with nuclear power plants, we need 850 gigawatt. We have presently less than 400. So basically, if we want to substitute all the current sector using e-fuels, that will require a so large installation that is not practically feasible. If we substitute the fossil fuel in the Mediterranean just for aviation and maritime transportation sectors, the electricity we would need is 1,000 terawatt-hour per year. That is the 60% of the electricity that we are currently generated in the Mediterranean. And you see also in terms of the equivalent installation of PV panels, wind and nuclear power, the numbers are much more reasonable. This simple exercise we did in doing this computation is just to remark with the numbers what I was saying, that there is a role for all the commodities, but there is not a winning commodities that should be the only one. We need to put them together. And so, for example, biofuels makes perfectly sense if applied, let's say, alternative fuels, both bio and synthetic, makes perfectly sense if they are applied to the transportation sector. And thanks for your attention.
Ecco perché non riusciva. Poi magari li diamo anche alla stampa, perché credo che magari come fotografo non so se
c'erano tanti numeri, però
ce li danno che
ve li diamo
grazie.
così, le guardiamo con calma, insomma,
vi mandiamo tutto.
Sì. Mr. Masera?
Okay,
If you
thank
wish
you.
to take the floor.
Yes, I would like to make some remarks. I don't know, 5 minutes?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay.
First, I was not director in the Commission. I was head of unit responsible for energy markets and energy security at the General Research Center of the Commission. So I would like to remark the importance of understanding and planning for the trajectories towards these targets and scenarios. So having targets and scenarios is very useful because we know where we want to go, but that's not enough. We have to understand the trajectories that will be the pathways for arriving there. And these pathways will not be quiet and simple. So all the problems that we are facing today will happen in the future. So we will have tensions between investments on fuels and electricity with our potential partners. We will face many risks because all these energy infrastructure that we are going to develop will be digitalized, will be exposed to many threats and hazards. And we will have to make substantial investments. So it's not billions. The investment for all this process will be trillions and trillions of euros in the next 30 years or 40 years. So there are going to be tensions and risks in a context that will have to change. So a main role for you in the European Parliament, the Commission and the Council will be, for instance, to review the regulation of the energy markets. This will have to happen in the next years. There's going to be to review the funding and financing of all the investments in infrastructure, and to be prepared for dealing with all the negative contingencies that will happen. This has a name, and this is resilience. So the point is how we have a resilient, not just energy system, but a resilient society able to face all these challenges. And we have to be clear on this. Today we are not ready, and we are not prepared. And the current crisis is a clear demonstration of this. So we will have to reflect also from the academic and research point of view on which are the capabilities that Europe would have to have in order to be ready, be prepared, anticipating the risk and tensions that will happen in the future. And we have to be serious on this. These risks and tensions will happen. We don't know why, we don't know where, we don't know when, but we can be sure that they will happen. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Now I would like to give the floor to Luca Matrone,
Thank you.
CIB.
Thank you very much, Francesca. First of all, I would like to greet and thank all the honorable members of the European Parliament and Massimo, SRM team, Francesca and my colleagues at Intesa, and Ettore with the Politecnico team. So thank you for having invited me also. I will be very quickly with 3 comments on some of the themes that are raised in your report that, by the way, I found really comprehensive and very rich of contents. So compliments for that. In particular, first of all, the point of the alternative fuels from, let's say, a financial perspective. So looking at it, as a bank, but also as investors, is a very relevant topic for the so-called greening the oil and gas industries. So it's one of the key pillars of the oil measures that announced the net zero targets, and therefore for sure is one of the key topics that is emerging in the strategies of the main players. Second point that for me is very, very relevant, also in particular with reference with what we have seen doing from the States, and also the so-called Inflation Reduction Act that is basically deploying a large amount of capital in order to support the companies to invest in renewables in the States. Obviously, also pose a problem of reshoring our value chains. So when you projected the slide with China and depend, it's not this is a very relevant point. We need to set up the right policies in order to try to keep in Europe the strategic sourcing of the components that we need for renewables, biofuels, and so on and so forth. And then I have one last remark related to the cooperation with the let's say southern shore of the Mediterranean area. I think that this has to be a key priority, but I have also to say very clearly from a bank perspective that it's very difficult to deploy private capital. So what we are saying is that there are a lot of investments from DFIs, sovereign institutions, financing from DFIs, financial institutions. But you see very limited blended finance, and this is because you don't have the right framework to deploy capital from a private perspective. To make some examples, you don't have grid access, you don't have network codes, you don't have authorization processes, you don't have off-takers that are bankable. You were mentioning Morocco, that is one of the best countries in the area, but Morocco is investment grade. Mazen, that is the incumbent that usually is the off-taker of the electricity renewable project, is not investment grade. So how can you finance with a 15 20 years let's say time frame taking a non-investment grade risks? So these are the practical issues that I think we need to address. And in my personal view, it would be very important if the European Union will try to support this advancement, basically because the financial instruments available, the MIGA coverage, so the World Bank MIGA coverage, all the other financial instruments are not really useful because they don't cover all the risks that need to be mitigated in order to finance these projects. So I think that Europe should play, a role of trying to do capacity building, creating the framework, and then also, supporting through a financial instrument the mitigation of some of the risks that the private sector cannot take. Thank you very much.
Thanks. Now we have the time for one question before giving afterwards the floor for the concluding remarks to Professor Francesco Profumo.
Thank you. No, it's not a question. I have I'm the International Affairs of Italian Chiefs Association and Secretary General of the Italian Maritime Cluster, Federazione del Mare. I have the privilege to be around this table this morning, but just a little bit by chance, so I would like to use it. Thank you, Mr. De Andres. You said that the shipping sector seems to be committed to decarbonize. We are committed. We are committed for a long time. Since I think 2011 in IMO, when we decided to promote XI and ADI, and we committed also after the COP15 in Paris, and COP15 in Paris was the landmark. The finance banks sat down at the table, and we knew that the transition was started. And we are very happy to be here too, so thank you for the report. It's important that all analysis is based on data. Thank you for this data. And that is something that is key also for the European Commission when dealing with the sustainable blue economy. We need data to base current action. it has been said around this table, we have the vision, we have the strategy, and we have the action plan, at least at EU level. And this legislature, European Parliament, the Commission, in 2019 with the Green Deal, and then in 2021 with the Fit for 55 package that is entering the final phase. I think that within 1 week we will have the final trial of the final decision on ETS, and next year within the Swedish presidency on the EU fuel maritime. We know what we are going, but as Ettore Bompa says too, fuel, dark fuel is still around because, you know, it's we set very ambitious targets. We are all committed, and all the maritime industry, all segments are committed, but it takes time, and we do hope that we will be able to, let's say, to feel the expectations in 2030 and 2050. But as it has been said, we are entering now that we have the framework, legislative framework into bumpy roads, heavy waters, because we have to implement, and we have still around a lot of uncertainties around. For example, the shipping sector that you mentioned, by next week on Monday, we are still waiting if we can carry, let's say, oil to third countries. We are still waiting the G7 political decision concerning the oil price cap. So all the segments are, operating in very, let's say, legal uncertainty. And it's difficult for everybody, as you rightly pointed out. But I just wanted to say, because I know that I just introduce myself, as the shipping sector is concerned, we are quite active, and it has been mentioned by precedent speakers before, within the renewable and low carbon fuels value chain industrial alliance that just kicked off works, I think it was last week, and together with fuel suppliers, we are committed to act together, to dialogue together in order to make these big challenges, this energy transition, green transition come true, because it has to happen as soon as possible, because let's say, the more we remain in this, let's say, gray area, the more it's going to be difficult. It's going to be difficult for our industry, Italian industry, that is made up of small and medium industry. So I think that we could speak a lot more. Thank you very much. It has been a privilege to be here. Thank you for this report, and be assured that the shipping industry, Confidarma in particular, will be a faithful partner on this. Thank you very much.
I'm a journalist.
Yes, well,
It's a very simple question. It's about Ireland.
we are waiting for Professor
Perhaps,
here's on the
after
line,
we
and
can
then
reply
if you
in bilateral.
Because we have time.
Also for the professor and
yes, but we will open
stay
a
here.
Q&A session after Professor Profumo will take the floor. I would like just to remind you all that Professor Francesco Profumo is the chairman of the Compagnia di Sanpaolo. He is one of the main shareholders of Intesa Sanpaolo. He's also a founding member of SRM, and he is also the president of ACLI. Professor Profumo, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you for the invitation. And I'm very sorry that I cannot be there today, but unfortunately I have one appointment here in Torino. And first of all, I really congratulate for this event and for the great job that was done by SRM and the Politecnico di Torino. And I'm sure that the discussion was a great discussion, and the output will be evident in the next months. Then, dear colleagues and friends, dear distinguished speakers, It's a great pleasure to join this high-level meeting at the European Parliament dedicated to the presentation of the first MED and Italian Energy Report presentation. Let me start by thanking Massimo De Andres and Professor Ettore Bonpard for their outstanding contribution to the scientific debate. I also wish to express my appreciation to all other excellent speakers for providing such interesting inputs and food for thought. I have the honor of closing this event by sharing with the audience a few considerations. First, this report is all the more significant because it was published at a critical time for the European and the Italian economy. The war in Ukraine after the COVID-19 pandemic has severely disrupted the macroeconomic scenario. Energy prices and energy supplies are now on the top of the global agenda. Alternative energy sources are becoming not only an environmental factor that contributes to achieve the goal of transition, but also a strategic and geopolitical asset. Second, the emerging model opens up a wide range of opportunities in terms of global positioning. The leadership shown by the EU at COP27 and its historical strong commitment taken with the Fit for 55 package confirm our role. Europe has started the energy transition process before other competitors, the US and China. It's therefore imperative that we pursue carbon neutrality for the future of our planet and support the rest of the world in this ambitious process. In particular, given its geographic position and its valuable source of alternative energy resources, the Mediterranean region represents an economic and logistic bridge between Europe and Africa that can provide a key contribution to accelerate the energy transition. We have the unique chance to leverage its strategic advantage in this arena by developing a partnership model capable of ensuring stability and economic growth for supplier countries. We need to relaunch the project of the Mediterranean area as an innovative laboratory of cooperation, starting from an essential diversification of energy sources, and then implementation of flexible energy systems. The path is clear: renewable energy production and synthetic fuels generate from renewable energy sources themselves, in which Africa is rich. Moving forward, energy transition will mark the political agenda of the EU member states for many years. To solve the current crisis, there is still a long way to go. The infrastructure gap is one of the biggest contributors to slowing down the economic development of our region and its full trade integration. The real challenge will now concern the mobilization of public-private capital in order to improve intra-regional interconnections, create an efficient energy value chain, and an integrated logistics platform, and support an highly competitive industrial ecosystem. Thirdly, The energy transition should also be seen as an incredible set of opportunities to better address the priorities of our society, from generating new jobs and developing new industries to clean and healthy environment and sustainable economic growth. Achieving these important goals requires huge amounts of investment in green infrastructure, innovation, research ecosystem, and smart cities. Occasions such as today's are important for defining priorities and devising action plans. Finally, the adoption of a more sustainable development model is a universal challenge that involves a growing number of players: citizens, businesses, the financial system, central and local institutions, and the third sector. As the Compagnia di Sanpaolo Foundation, and as a part of a system of foundations of banking origin, we will do our best, providing our resources, ideas, and competencies. Inclusive and green economies, prosperity, cleaner air, and better health are possible only with solidarity, courage, and vision. Thank you. Have a good day.
Thank you.
Many thanks, Professor Profumo. Many thanks to you all. I really hope that you found this event interesting. Of course, we are ready here to to answer any question you may have outside this meeting room, because we need to leave the room at noon, at 12 o'clock. I would also like to thank you so much also the attendance on a remote basis. I also hope that you found it interesting, and let us keep in touch. If you need further information, our speakers are there, but outside the room. Thank you.
Thank you.
See you soon.